Hi, everyone. Welcome back to our podcast. Before we start, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. And if you have thoughts about today's topic, write them in the comments. Today, we are talking about something many people experience: procrastination.
Yes, procrastination is very common. It is when you delay something you know you should do. For example, you have an important task, but you decide to check your phone, watch videos, or clean your desk instead. Somehow, everything else suddenly feels more interesting than the task.
That is very true. Yesterday, I had an important report to finish. The deadline was today. But instead of starting early, I kept telling myself, I will start in 10 minutes. 10 minutes became 1 hour, and 1 hour became the entire afternoon.
That sounds very familiar. Many people think procrastination is about laziness, but I don't think that is always true. Sometimes people delay tasks because the task feels difficult, stressful, or even boring. The brain tries to escape that discomfort.
That makes sense. When something feels stressful, our mind looks for easier or more enjoyable activities. Checking social media, making coffee, organizing files. Suddenly, these things feel very productive, even if they are not the task we actually need to do.
Exactly. It is interesting because people often procrastinate the most when a task is important. When the deadline is far away, we think we have time. And when the deadline becomes close, suddenly the pressure appears.
Pressure is an interesting part of this. Some people say they actually work better under pressure. They delay the task until the last moment, and then they finish it quickly before the deadline. But I always wonder, is that really productive?
That is a good question. Maybe pressure gives people temporary motivation, but it also creates stress and anxiety. And sometimes, the work quality becomes worse because there is no time to think carefully.
When we talk about procrastination, I think the most interesting question is psychological. Why does the brain avoid difficult tasks in the first place? It's strange, because logically, we know the task is important, but emotionally, the brain still tries to escape it.
Yes, and many psychologists say the brain is trying to protect us. When a task feels stressful or complicated, the brain sees it as a kind of threat. Not a physical danger, of course, but an emotional one. So it pushes us towards something easier or more pleasant.
That explains a lot of everyday behavior. For example, when someone needs to write a long report or study for an exam, instead of starting the task, they suddenly feel a strong desire to clean their room or check their messages. It's like the brain says, let's do literally anything else.
Exactly. And interestingly, the brain prefers short-term comfort over long-term benefits. Writing the report will feel good later when it's finished. But watching a video or scrolling on the phone feels good right now.
So procrastination is not really about time management. It is more about emotion management. We delay the task because we want to avoid the uncomfortable feeling it creates: stress, uncertainty, or even fear of failure.
Fear of failure is a big one. Sometimes people delay starting a task because they worry they might not do it well. And strangely, delaying the task gives them a kind of excuse. If the result is not perfect, they can say, well, I didn't have enough time.
That is a very honest observation. Procrastination sometimes protects our ego. If we never fully try, we never fully risk failure. But of course, that also means we never fully improve.
Exactly. And the brain repeats behaviors that reduce stress quickly. So if checking the phone helps you escape the stress of a task once, the brain learns that habit and repeats it again and again.
That explains why procrastination becomes a habit. The brain learns a simple pattern: difficult task to uncomfortable feeling to quick distraction. And that loop becomes automatic. Fear of failure is something many people don't talk about openly. Sometimes we say we are busy or tired, but the real reason is different. Deep down, we might be afraid that we are not good enough to do the task well. And that fear quietly pushes us to delay starting.
I agree with that. When a task is very important, the pressure becomes bigger. For example, writing an important email, preparing a presentation, or starting a big project. If the result matters a lot, the fear of doing it badly becomes stronger.
That creates a strange situation. The task is important, so we should start early and focus carefully. But because it is important, we feel more pressure and anxiety. And instead of working, we delay it even more.
It's almost like the brain is trying to protect our confidence. If we don't start the task, we don't have to face the possibility of failure. The mind creates a safe space where we can say, I could do it well. I just didn't start yet. It protects our self-image.
That reminds me of students who delay studying for exams. If they study seriously and still fail, it hurts their confidence. But if they procrastinate and fail, they can blame the lack of time instead of their ability. In a strange way, procrastination becomes an emotional shield.
That is a powerful idea. Procrastination is not only about time or discipline. Sometimes it is about protecting our feelings and our identity. We avoid the task because we want to avoid the emotional risk.
But the problem is that this protection is temporary. In the long run, delaying tasks usually creates more stress, not less. The closer the deadline gets, the more pressure we feel. And the fear we tried to escape becomes even stronger.
Exactly. The brain tries to escape the fear at first, but later the situation becomes worse. More pressure, less time, and often lower quality work. That is the hidden cost of procrastination.
Another interesting connection with procrastination is perfectionism. Many people think perfectionists are always productive and organized, but in reality, perfectionism can sometimes create the opposite effect. The desire to do something perfectly can make it harder to start.
Yes, that sounds paradoxical, but it happens often. When someone wants every detail to be perfect, the task suddenly feels bigger and heavier. Instead of seeing the task as something to complete, they see it as something that must be flawless. And that pressure can stop them from beginning at all.
I have experienced that myself. Sometimes when I write something important, like a report or an article, I want the first sentence to be perfect. But because of that, I spend 20 minutes just staring at the screen.
That is a classic example. Perfectionists often believe they must start with the best idea or the best sentence. But creativity usually works differently. Often the first version is messy, and improvement comes later.
That makes sense. When people expect perfection immediately, the task feels risky. Every small mistake feels like failure instead of progress. So procrastination becomes a way to delay that uncomfortable feeling.
Exactly. In psychology, some experts say perfectionism increases the emotional cost of starting a task. If the standard is unrealistically high, even a small step feels like a big challenge. The brain thinks, if I cannot do it perfectly, maybe I should not start yet.
And ironically, that delay often makes the result worse. When perfectionists wait too long, they end up rushing the work before the deadline. So the final result is far from perfect anyway. The pressure they tried to avoid returns even stronger.
That's the real irony of perfectionism. The desire to produce perfect work can lead to unfinished work. And unfinished work is usually more stressful than imperfect work. Progress is often more valuable than perfection.
When people talk about productivity, motivation is usually the first word they mention. We often hear advice like, wait until you feel motivated, or find your motivation before you start. But I'm starting to wonder if motivation is actually the most reliable thing. Because motivation changes so easily.
I completely agree with that. Motivation feels powerful when it appears, but it's also very unstable. One day you wake up excited and ready to work, and the next day you feel tired and distracted. If we depend only on motivation, our productivity becomes unpredictable.
That's where discipline becomes interesting. Discipline means doing something even when you don't feel like doing it. It's more about habit than emotion. Instead of waiting for motivation, you simply follow a routine.
Many successful people talk about this difference. They say motivation is useful for starting something new, but long-term progress usually comes from discipline and daily habits. Small, consistent actions create bigger results over time.
That reminds me of exercise habits. People who go to the gym regularly don't wake up excited every single day. Some days, they probably feel lazy or tired. But the habit pushes them to go anyway.
Exactly. Discipline removes the decision process. Instead of asking, "Do I feel motivated today?" the person simply follows the schedule they already created.
That seems like an important lesson for procrastination. If we wait for the perfect mood or the perfect level of motivation, we might wait for a very long time. Discipline helps us start, even when the mood isn't perfect.
And interestingly, motivation often appears after we start working. Once the brain is engaged in the task, the resistance slowly disappears. The first step is usually the hardest part. After that, the work begins to flow more naturally.
There is a simple strategy many productivity experts talk about called the 5-minute rule. The idea is very simple. Instead of forcing yourself to finish a big task, you only promise to work on it for 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes, nothing more. And surprisingly, that small step can break procrastination.
That sounds almost too simple, but psychologically it makes sense. The brain usually resists tasks because they feel large and overwhelming. When you reduce the task to 5 minutes, the mental barrier becomes much smaller.
Exactly. When the brain hears, "finish this big project," it reacts with stress. But when it hears, "just work for 5 minutes," the task suddenly feels manageable. It becomes easier to start.
And something interesting often happens after those 5 minutes. Once you begin working, the resistance slowly disappears. Your mind becomes focused on the task itself instead of the fear of starting. Many people continue working much longer than 5 minutes.
I've experienced that many times. When I delay writing something, the hardest part is opening the document. But once I write the first sentence, the second and third sentences come more easily. The task suddenly feels possible.
That's the key psychological shift. Procrastination often lives in the moment before we start working. The brain imagines the task as huge and exhausting. But once the task becomes real and active, the imagination loses power.
So the 5-minute rule is really about lowering the starting barrier. Instead of fighting procrastination with willpower alone, you make the first step extremely small and easy. And that small step creates momentum.
Momentum is important. Once the brain enters a state of focus, continuing the task requires less effort. In many cases, people finish half the task or even the entire task, all because they committed to just 5 minutes.
It's interesting how often progress begins with a tiny action. Not a huge burst of motivation, but a small decision to begin. Sometimes 5 minutes is enough to change the entire day. Another big reason people procrastinate today is modern distraction. In the past, distractions existed, but they were limited. Today, our phones, social media, and notifications are always around us. And they constantly compete for our attention.
That's a very important point. Modern technology is designed to capture attention. Social media platforms, for example, are built to keep people scrolling. Every notification or message creates a small interruption.
And those interruptions may look small, but they have a big effect. Imagine you are trying to focus on a task. You start working, and then your phone vibrates. Suddenly, your attention moves away from the task.
Exactly. And the problem is not only the interruption itself. The brain needs time to return to deep focus after being distracted. Some studies suggest it can take several minutes to regain full concentration.
That explains why people sometimes feel busy but not productive. They spend the day switching between tasks, messages, and notifications. The mind never stays in one place long enough to do meaningful work. It's constant movement without real progress.
And social media adds another layer to this problem. Platforms show short, fast, entertaining content that gives instant rewards. Compared to that, tasks like studying, writing, or analyzing data feel slower and harder. The brain naturally chooses the easier reward.
That's a powerful comparison. When the brain gets used to quick rewards, longer tasks feel more demanding and less attractive. So procrastination becomes even more tempting.
Which raises an interesting question. If modern distractions are so powerful, maybe productivity today is less about time management and more about attention management.
I like that idea. Protecting attention might be one of the most important skills today. Without attention, even the best plans and schedules don't work. Focus becomes the real resource. If distractions are everywhere today, then attention becomes something we must actively protect. It's almost like a resource, similar to time or energy. Once our attention is broken again and again, it becomes difficult to return to deep thinking. That's why attention management is becoming such an important skill.
I agree with that idea. Many people try to improve productivity by planning their time better. But sometimes the real problem is not time, it's attention. Even with a perfect schedule, constant interruptions can destroy focus.
One simple method people suggest is reducing notifications. Phones are designed to send alerts for messages, emails, apps, and updates. Each notification pulls your mind away from the task. Turning off unnecessary notifications can make a big difference.
Another helpful strategy is creating a focus environment. For example, placing the phone in another room while working, or using apps that temporarily block social media. Small environmental changes can reduce temptation.
I've tried something similar recently. When I start an important task, I place my phone face down on the desk. Sometimes I even put it in silent mode for an hour. That small change makes it easier to stay focused.
That's a good habit. Another idea is setting clear focus periods. Instead of trying to concentrate all day, people work deeply for 30 or 60 minutes. Then they take a short break before starting again.
That approach feels more realistic than expecting perfect concentration all day. The brain naturally needs pauses and recovery. Alternating between focused work and short breaks can protect mental energy, and it reduces the urge to check distractions constantly.
In a way, managing attention is about designing your environment and habits. Instead of fighting distractions with willpower alone, you make distractions less available in the first place. That makes focus easier and more natural.
Which means productivity is not only about discipline, it's also about structure. When the environment supports focus, the brain can work more calmly and efficiently, and procrastination becomes less tempting. That idea about protecting attention naturally leads to another concept people talk about today: deep work. Deep work means working on something with full concentration, without interruptions. No phone notifications, no emails, no quick distractions. Just one task and full mental focus.
Yes, and the interesting thing about deep work is the quality it produces. When the brain focuses deeply on one task, it can think more clearly and creatively. Ideas connect more easily, and complex problems become easier to understand. That level of thinking is difficult to reach when we constantly switch between tasks.
I've noticed that in writing. If I try to write something while checking messages every few minutes, the result feels fragmented. But when I work for 1 hour without interruption, the ideas flow much more naturally.
That's a perfect example. Deep work allows the brain to enter what psychologists sometimes call a flow state. In that state, time feels different and concentration becomes effortless. The mind is completely engaged in the task.
That explains why some people finish important work in just a few focused hours. It's not always about working longer. Sometimes it's about working with deeper concentration. Quality of focus matters more than quantity of hours.
And unfortunately, modern work environments often interrupt that process. Emails, meetings, notifications, and constant communication break concentration. Each interruption pulls the brain out of deep thinking. Then it takes time to return to that state again.
Which means deep work requires intentional protection. People often schedule specific hours for focused work. During that time, they avoid meetings and digital distractions. It becomes a protected block of attention.
And that habit can slowly change productivity. Instead of reacting to messages all day, a person dedicates certain periods to meaningful work. Over time, those focus sessions create bigger progress.
So, in a world full of distractions, deep work almost becomes a competitive advantage. The ability to focus deeply is becoming rare, and because it's rare, it becomes extremely valuable. People who develop that skill can produce better work in less time. You mentioned the idea of a flow state earlier, and I think that's a fascinating psychological concept. It describes those moments when a person becomes completely absorbed in an activity. Time seems to move differently, and the outside world almost disappears. Many people say they feel most productive and creative during those moments.
Yes, and what's interesting is that the brain actually enjoys that state once it begins. At the beginning of a task, the brain often resists effort and seeks easier activities. But once concentration becomes stable, the brain shifts into a different mode. Instead of resisting the work, it starts to feel rewarding.
That's a big contrast with procrastination. When we procrastinate, the brain focuses on discomfort and avoidance. But in a flow state, the brain focuses entirely on the task itself. The activity becomes engaging rather than stressful.
Psychologists say this happens because the brain enjoys solving challenges. When a task is difficult but still manageable, it activates curiosity and problem solving. The mind becomes curious about the next step, the next idea, or the next solution. That curiosity keeps the attention locked in.
So the key seems to be the balance between difficulty and ability. If a task is too easy, we become bored. If it is too difficult, we feel anxious and overwhelmed. But when the challenge matches our skills, the brain becomes deeply engaged.
Exactly. In that balanced state, concentration becomes natural rather than forced. People often describe it as feeling in the zone. The effort is still there, but it feels smooth and enjoyable.
That might explain why starting is always the hardest part. Before the brain enters the flow state, it only sees the effort required. But once the mind crosses that starting barrier, the experience becomes much more satisfying.
And this connects back to the 5-minute rule we discussed earlier. Small actions help the brain cross the starting barrier. Once the work begins, the mind has a chance to enter that focused state. And from there, productivity can grow naturally.
Something related to deep work that I find very interesting is the difference between being busy and being productive. Many people say they are busy all day. They answer emails, attend meetings, check messages, and switch between many tasks. But at the end of the day, they sometimes feel that nothing truly important was completed.
Yes, that feeling is very common. The problem is that activity and progress are not always the same thing. A person can be active for many hours, but still make very little meaningful progress. Busyness can create the illusion of productivity.
Emails are a perfect example. Answering messages feels like work, and sometimes it is necessary. But if someone spends the entire day responding to emails, they may never have time for deeper tasks like planning, writing, or problem solving.
Meetings can also create that effect. Some meetings are useful and necessary, but when meetings become constant, they interrupt the flow of focused work. The day becomes fragmented into small pieces of attention.
That fragmentation is important. When the day is divided into many small interruptions, the brain never has enough time to enter deep concentration. Without that deep focus, meaningful progress becomes slower.
Exactly. Meaningful productivity usually comes from a small number of important tasks. Tasks that require thinking, creativity, or careful decision-making. Those tasks need time and uninterrupted attention.
So perhaps the real question is not, how busy am I, but what important work did I actually finish today? That shift in perspective changes how we evaluate our workday. Productivity becomes about impact, not activity.
And that might be one of the biggest challenges in modern work culture. Many environments reward visible activity, quick responses, constant communication, and fast reactions. But the most valuable work is often quiet, slow, and deeply focused. It happens when attention is protected.
Which brings us back to procrastination in an interesting way. Sometimes people avoid difficult work by filling their day with smaller tasks. They stay busy, but the most meaningful work remains unfinished. And that hidden procrastination can be harder to notice. Another idea connected to productivity is energy. Many people think productivity is only about managing time. But in reality, mental energy is just as important as time. Without energy, even a free schedule doesn't lead to good work.
That's a very important point. Two people can have the same amount of time in a day, but the person with higher mental energy will usually produce better results. Focus becomes stronger when the brain is rested and alert.
I've noticed that in my own work. In the morning, when my mind feels fresh, I can solve complex problems much faster. But late at night, the same task suddenly feels much harder.
That happens because the brain uses a lot of energy for deep thinking. Tasks like writing, planning, or analyzing information require strong concentration. When mental energy is low, the brain naturally looks for easier activities. That's when procrastination becomes more tempting.
Which means productivity is not only about working longer hours. Sometimes working with high energy for 2 focused hours can produce more results than 8 distracted hours. Quality of attention depends on the brain's energy level.
Exactly. That's why rest, sleep, and breaks are part of productivity. When the brain recovers its energy, focus becomes easier again. Energy and attention work together.
So when we think about procrastination, we should not only ask, do I have enough time? We should also ask, do I have enough mental energy? Sometimes the best solution is not pushing harder, but resting first.
That might be one of the most important lessons in productivity. Time management, attention management, and energy management all work together. When those three are balanced, meaningful progress becomes much easier, and procrastination loses much of its power.
If you enjoyed today's discussion about procrastination, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more English listening podcasts.
And we'd love to hear from you. Do you ever procrastinate important tasks? Write your thoughts in the comments and share your experience.
Thank you for listening. See you in the next episode. Goodbye.